Memphis, Tennessee, August 19, 1992. The summer heat on Beale Street that morning was the kind that arrives before sunrise and never apologizes. By 9 o'clock, the sidewalk was already warm through the soles of your shoes. The air smelled of last night's stale beer soaked into brick, the ghost of cigarette smoke that never fully left these blocks, and underneath it all, something older, something that had nothing to do with any particular year. Beale Street carried its history in the air itself, and on a hot August morning with the tourists still asleep in their hotels, you could almost hear it breathing. Most of the shops were still shuttered. A few pigeons worked the gutter near a storm drain. A city maintenance truck rolled past slowly, orange light turning. The famous neon signs that blazed all night were dark now, just dark glass tubing in iron frames, waiting for evening to mean anything again. Half a block down from the corner of Beale and 4th, in the narrow slot of shade between a closed souvenir shop and a bar that wouldn't open for another 4 hours, a man named Roosevelt Grimes had set up for the morning. He was 67 years old, though he looked older in the way that outdoor life ages a person. Not badly, not sadly, just honestly. His face was deeply lined, the color of old mahogany, with eyes that were still sharp and very dark beneath heavy brows. He wore a short-sleeved white dress shirt that had been washed so many times it had gone soft as cotton gauze, dark trousers with a crease that he ironed in every morning out of a habit that went back 40 years, and shoes that were old but clean. He had a small folding chair he carried in a canvas bag, and a battered guitar case that he set open on the sidewalk in front of him, its purple velvet lining faded to a dusty lavender. Inside the case, a few dollar bills he had put there himself to start the morning, the way you prime a pump, a handwritten cardboard sign, ROSEVLTGRIMES, Blues since 1947, and his guitar, a 1954 K archtop, sunburst finish worn to bare wood at the edges, its top checked with a network of fine cracks that 40 years of humidity and dry seasons had worked into the spruce. 3 of its tuning pegs were original. One had been replaced with something that didn't quite match. The bridge had been shimmed twice. The strings were not new. Roosevelt had been playing this guitar on these blocks, off and on, since 1961. He had played it in clubs when the clubs were hearing, on street corners when they weren't, at church picnics and wedding receptions and birthday parties, and once at a funeral where the deceased had specifically requested him by name in the written will. He had played it through a marriage, through 2 sons who had moved away, through the death of his wife Clara in 1988. He had played it through everything, and everything had gone into it. And now, on a hot August morning in 1992, he sat in his folding chair in the narrow shade and played for whoever happened to walk by. Which at 9 in the morning on a weekday was almost nobody. That suited Roosevelt fine. He wasn't playing for tips at 9 in the morning. He was playing because the morning needed it, and because his hands needed it, and because Clara used to say that a guitar unplayed for a full day was a small sadness. He didn't think about that consciously. He just picked up the guitar every morning the way other men picked up a newspaper. He was playing a slow shuffle in G, nothing in particular, when the patrol car rolled to a stop at the curb. Officer Dennis Caulfield was 29 years old, 3 years on the force, recently transferred to this district from a precinct in East Memphis where things had been different. He was not a bad man. He genuinely believed, in the uncomplicated way of someone who has not yet been tested much by complexity, that order and tidiness were the same thing as justice. He had been told by his sergeant that the Beale Street corridor was being prepared for an expanded tourism push, that the city wanted the block looking clean and professional, and that unlicensed street performers were a quality-of-life issue. He had been given a list of talking points. He had memorized them. He got out of the patrol car and walked to where Roosevelt was sitting. Roosevelt saw him coming and kept playing. He had seen this particular walk before, not from this particular officer, but from the general posture, the particular set of the jaw that meant someone had decided something before they arrived. "Sir," Caulfield stopped in front of the open guitar case. "I'm going to need you to pack up and move along." Roosevelt finished the phrase he was in the middle of. It would have been rude to stop mid-phrase and then let the note fade. He looked up at the officer. "Morning," he said. "Morning, I need you to clear this spot. You're blocking pedestrian flow." Roosevelt looked at the sidewalk in both directions. At 9 in the morning, there was no pedestrian flow to speak of. A woman with a grocery bag had passed 30 feet away without slowing down. "Don't see much flow to block," he said pleasantly. Caulfield's jaw tightened slightly. "Sir, this is a designated tourist corridor. Unlicensed vending and performance is a violation of City Ordinance 14B. I need you to pack up." "Been playing this corner 30 years, Roosevelt said. Not arguing, just nodding something, the way you note the weather." "I understand that, sir, but I have my orders." Caulfield glanced at the open guitar case, at the few bills on the faded velvet, at the cardboard sign. "Nobody wants to hear this anyway. Move along, please." His voice had gone flatter on that sentence, more automatic, the kind of sentence that comes out when someone has stopped thinking about the person in front of them and started thinking about the task. He hadn't meant to say it exactly that way, but he had said it. "Nobody wants to hear this." Roosevelt looked at him for a moment. His expression didn't change much. He had heard versions of this sentence before, in different rooms from different mouths, over the course of 67 years, and he had learned a long time ago that the sentence said more about the person speaking it than about the thing it was describing. He set his pick carefully on the top of the guitar. He began, slowly, to loosen the strings for transport. He didn't speak. He didn't argue. He just began to pack up, with the deliberate, unhurried movements of a man who has packed up this particular guitar on this particular corner more times than he could count, and who will pack it up as carefully the last time as he did the first. 20 feet away, on the other side of a parked delivery truck, a man had stopped walking. He had been moving along the sidewalk on the opposite side of the street when the patrol car had pulled up, and he had slowed, and then stopped. And now he stood with a paper cup of coffee in one hand and watched through the gap between the truck and the building behind it. He was a large man, broad-shouldered, heavy-set in the way of someone who has always been built that way, with short-cropped gray hair and a round, warm face that was currently doing something complicated and quiet. He wore a deep royal blue jacquard-patterned silk shirt, a brocade of subtle gold and navy running through it in a pattern that caught even the flat morning light, dark trousers, and good shoes. A simple watch on his left wrist. No hat today. Just a man on a morning walk with a cup of coffee who had stopped, because something had required him to stop. He watched Roosevelt loosen the strings. He watched the officer say something else that couldn't be heard from this distance. He watched Roosevelt nod, patient, unhurried, not agreeing, just acknowledging, and begin to fold his small chair. The large man in the blue shirt set his coffee cup on top of the delivery truck. He looked at it for a moment. Then he crossed the street. He walked up behind the patrol car, came around the front of it, and stepped up onto the sidewalk. Caulfield heard the footsteps and turned. "Morning," the large man said. His voice was low and warm, a bass register that seemed to come up from somewhere deep, unhurried. He was looking at Roosevelt, not the officer. "Don't pack that up yet." Roosevelt looked up from the case. He studied the large man in the blue shirt, the warm face, the easy authority in the voice that came not from rank but from something else entirely. He didn't recognize him. He was just a large man in a nice shirt on Beale Street at 9 in the morning. "Sir," Caulfield said, "this is a police matter." "I know it is." The large man reached into his trouser pocket and produced a worn leather wallet. He opened it, took out two $50 bills, and leaned down and placed them in the open guitar case on top of the faded lavender velvet. He straightened up. "That's for the morning," he said to Roosevelt. Then he looked at Caulfield. "He's performing. I just became his audience. You need two for a gathering ordinance." A pause. "I counted." Caulfield stared at him. Something was happening at the edge of his recognition. The face, the voice, something, but he hadn't placed it yet. The large man looked back at Roosevelt. "May I?" He nodded at the guitar. Roosevelt looked at him for a moment longer. Then he picked up the K archtop and held it out. The large man took it with both hands. He turned it over once, ran his thumb along the back seam, pressed his palm flat against the spruce top. He tilted it in the light, reading the grain. Then he settled it across his lap, adjusted his position slightly, and reached into his shirt pocket for a pick. 40 years of playing on these blocks, he said to nobody in particular, looking down at the guitar. Clara used to say a guitar unplayed is a small sadness. He looked up at Roosevelt. Am I right about her name? Roosevelt went very still. How do you know her name? I don't, the large man said simply. But a man who irons a crease into his trousers every morning to play on a street corner is a man who had someone who cared how he looked, and someone who cared how he looked for 30 years leaves a name. He looked back down at the guitar. What was her favorite? Roosevelt's throat moved. Stormy Monday, he said, barely above a whisper. The large man nodded. He settled the pick against the strings. And he began to play. T-Bone Walker's Stormy Monday. Slow, so slow, a tempo so unhurried that the spaces between the notes were as full as the notes themselves. The old K archtop, with its worn frets and shimmed bridge and strings that were not new, opened up under those hands and produced a sound that had no business coming from that instrument on that sidewalk on that morning. Warm, round, human. Each note bent upward at the end the way a question bends. The way a blues note always bends, because the blues has never been about answers. His left hand, the vibrato, that trembling, breathing, living vibrato that was like nothing else in American music, not a mechanical shimmer, but a voice that had been playing since he was a child in Itta, Mississippi, that had played its way out of the Delta and onto every stage in the world and back again, and was now playing on a sidewalk on Beale Street for one man and a patrol car and the pigeons and the morning. Officer Caulfield had not moved. He was standing at the edge of the sidewalk with his hands at his sides and his notepad in his right hand and his pen in his left hand, and he was not writing anything. He was listening. Something about the sound had reached past the task and the ordnance and the talking points and found something older in him, something that didn't have a name in any regulation he had memorized. A woman came around the corner from 4th Street and stopped. A man who had been unlocking the souvenir shop next door came out onto the sidewalk and stood with his keys in his hand. A delivery driver, who had been moving boxes from a truck half a block down, straightened up and looked. Nobody had announced anything. Nobody had put up a sign. The sound had simply reached through the August air the way sound does when it is true, and people had followed it. Roosevelt Grimes sat in his folding chair with his hands in his lap, and his eyes on the man playing his guitar, and his face was doing something that faces do when they are receiving something they did not expect and do not quite have room for yet. The large man played through the verse, through the chorus, through the long, slow bridge where the melody opens up and says everything it has been building toward. He played the final phrase. He let the last note ring and ring and ring, that vibrato holding the note past where any other player would have let it fall, and then he lifted his hand, and the note faded into the Memphis morning and was gone. 4 seconds of silence. Then the woman from 4th Street started clapping. The man with the keys joined her. The delivery driver, 2 more people who had materialized from somewhere during the song. The large man held the K archtop out to Roosevelt. Roosevelt took it with both hands, the way you receive something back that you thought was going to be taken from you. That guitar, the large man said, has been played with love for 40 years. You can hear it in the wood. He paused. Don't let anybody tell you what it's worth. He reached into his shirt pocket again. He took out a guitar pick, his own, custom, the edges worn smooth by years of use, and he held it out to Roosevelt. Roosevelt took it. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked up. The woman who had come around the corner had her phone out and was looking at it, then at the large man, then at it again. Her mouth opened. She looked at the man next to her and said something. He looked at his own phone. His mouth opened too. The whisper moved through the small gathered crowd like a current. Caulfield heard it. He looked at the large man in the royal blue shirt. He looked at his own phone, which he had pulled out without quite deciding to. He looked up. "I didn't know," Caulfield said. He wasn't sure what he meant exactly. He meant the guitar. He meant the man. He meant the sound. He meant the crease ironed into the trousers every morning for 30 years. He meant all of it, and none of it had a clean sentence. The large man looked at him. No anger, no performance of dignity, just those eyes, warm, patient, carrying something long. "I played these blocks when I was starting out," he said quietly. "Before anyone knew my name. Somebody always wanted me to move along." A pause. The music didn't move. He looked at Roosevelt one more time. Roosevelt was holding the pick in his closed fist, pressed against his sternum, eyes very bright. "Clara heard you this morning," the large man said. He said it simply, without theater, the way you say something you know to be true. Then he picked up his coffee cup from the top of the delivery truck where he had left it, still warm, and he walked back down Beale Street the way he had come, his royal blue jacquard shirt catching the August light, just an older gentleman on a morning walk, until he rounded the corner and was gone. Roosevelt Grimes sat in his folding chair for a while without playing. He looked at the pick in his palm. He looked at the two $50 bills on the lavender velvet. He looked up at the slice of sky visible between the buildings. Then he settled the K archtop across his knee, found the position, and began to play Stormy Monday again. Slow, the way he had just heard it played, reaching for something in the spaces between the notes that he had never quite reached for before. Officer Dennis Caulfield stood on the sidewalk for another moment. He put his notepad in his pocket. He put his pen in his pocket. He looked at the man playing the guitar, and then at the small crowd still gathered, and then at his patrol car. He got in. He drove 1 block. He pulled over and sat for a while with the engine running and his hands on the wheel. He never issued another unlicensed performance citation on Beale Street. He told one person about it, years later, his daughter, when she was studying music in college, and asked him if he had ever heard anything that changed the way he heard everything else. He thought about it for a moment and said yes. Once, on a Thursday morning in August, on Beale Street, an old man and a beat-up guitar and a sound he still couldn't fully describe. She asked him who was playing. He smiled. "That's the thing," he said. "I didn't know at first, and then I did. And then it didn't matter anymore which one it was because the sound was the same either way. Some lessons arrive before you know whose voice is carrying them. The voice that matters is always the one that stays." B.B. King passed from this world on May 14, 2015. He was 89 years old. He played until he couldn't. He never stopped believing that the blues belonged on every street corner, in every city, in every pair of hands that needed it. He was right. If you have ever heard a piece of music at exactly the right moment, the moment when it said something your own life had been trying to say, drop it in the comments. I read every one, and which B.B. King song has stayed with you the longest? Let me know. You think you've heard everything. Then one morning on a street corner you realize you haven't heard anything yet. B.B. King.